Am I live now? Oh, okay, cool. Well, hello everyone. Can you see me? I can move closer to the whiteboard. So, my name's Devin. I am the head coach here at CrossFit Control. See me now? Cool. I am the only level 3 in the state of West Virginia. We're going to break down the squat series for you guys today. So a couple quick things I want to talk about first, though, is we're running a nutrition kickstart here at CrossFit Control. Anyone's welcome to do it. It's completely online. It's a 4-week kickstart where you will be building habits over the course of 4 weeks. It's ran by our nutrition coach, Aaron, so you can reach out to me or Coach Aaron on Facebook if you have any questions on that stuff. We are also doing a charity event on the 28th for the Seth Project. It is to raise money for ALS research. Anyone is welcome to join us for it. There's a $30 donation to get in for the workout. And so now we're going to get into the squat series. So in CrossFit, there are 9 foundational movements. We have a squat series, a press series, and a deadlift series. And today we're going to break down the squat series. So our squat series is the air squat, otherwise known as a body weight squat, the front squat, where you have an object in that front rack position, or the overhead squat, where you have something overhead. Now, you probably can see these get more complex as we move through the series. And what we also find is any deficiencies we see in these movement patterns are going to make themselves more aware as we move farther down the chain. So if we struggle to keep our torso upright in the air squat, we're going to see it in the front squat, and then it's really going to show itself in that overhead squat. And you guys, for you guys on Facebook, you can't see this, but we have people sitting behind the cameras, are probably aware anytime we do overhead squats, it's more challenging than doing that air squat, right? So when it comes to these foundational movements, the 9 from CrossFit, we have common themes that we look for in these movements. I'm going to break these down first, so that way when you actually see these movements, you're more aware of what we're looking for, especially on the coaching side. So the first one we take a look at, I wrote the abbreviations for them, but MLS is midline stabilization. So if you think about it, your center, your spine, where all your nerves and everything, your home base, we want to protect that the most. So that's where that midline stabilization comes from. We want to try to keep that spine nice and straight as we go through these movements. From there we go down into posterior chain engagement. That's these big muscles on the back side of the body. So calf, hamstring, glutes, back, they're all connected. That's our posterior chain engagement. So oftentimes you guys hear me say, push your hips back when you go to squat. That's turning on these big moving muscles on the back side of the body. From there, core to extremity. So core, we start out in the middle where all the larger muscles are. And so think about throwing a baseball or a football. When you go to throw, it all starts from the middle, and then it goes to the shoulder, elbow, and then down to the wrist, and all the way out to the fingertips. So you're going from the core all the way out to your extremity. Now, when we look at core to extremity, more power, not as fast, but as you get out to the extremity, less power, but more velocity. Does that make sense to everyone? From there, full range of motion. When we do these movement patterns, we really like to focus on moving with full range of motion before adding load or increasing the intensity of the movement pattern. And so with that, what we would look for is being able to squat to full depth before we go into a super heavy front squat. If we're doing quarter squats, they're not as beneficial as moving with full range of motion. And then the last one is active shoulders. And active shoulders doesn't really apply to the air squat. However, it does apply to your front squat and your overhead squat. We want to make sure this joint is nice and active and stable anytime we're getting into these movement patterns. And so those are the themes we're going to look for in the air squat, the overhead squat, and the front squat. And now we're going to break them down, and we're going to talk about the points of performance for each. I had a piece of paper up here. Where did it go? Oh. Do I have any assistants? Rebecca? Now, this is my assistant, Rebecca. She is one of the best squatters we have in the gym. And I was really hoping Brad would be here to demo the overhead squat, but me? Maybe we need to move the camera back just a little bit. Do we have anybody actually watching? Are the Rileys watching from home? So we're going to break down the air squat now. First thing we need to look at is the setup. So when she sets up, she's going to have about a shoulder width stance, and everyone's different. Some people squat narrow, some people squat more wide, but narrow stance, toes are going to be slightly out, especially if we have any ankle range of motion issues, and then we want to be standing nice and tall. Now, we're going to break down the 5 points of performance. The first one, we want to protect home base. We want to protect that spine, so midline stabilization. She's going to squeeze her belly before she gets into the squat. From there, we look at the hips going back and down, which engages those backside muscles, posterior chain engagement. So as she squats, hips go back. She's keeping her chest up, keeping that midline stable. You can go ahead and stand, Rebecca. Thank you. So midline stabilization, that's number one, keeping that spine nice and straight, keeping that lumbar curve maintained. From there, we get into hips going back and down. That engages the posterior chain, the hamstrings, the glutes, the back. Now, the other thing we want to look at for engaging the posterior chain is we want to sit the weight into the heels. Now, that doesn't mean our toes are coming up off the ground. Just oftentimes, if people struggle with range of motion, they end up on their toes as they squat. So as the hips go back, she sits into her heels to initiate the squat. Look at how good that squat is. Look, we all wish that we could squat like that, right? Thanks, Rebecca. Now, from there, we look at what are the knees doing. So the knee is a hinge joint, okay? It's not like the shoulder. It doesn't have all this range of motion. It needs to hinge. So the knee actually needs to track in line with the toes so it can hinge properly. So as she goes to squat, hips go back. She's going to drive and make sure her knees are in line with her toes. You want to show us that? Boom. Such a pretty squat. And stand. The last thing we talk about, full range of motion, which would be the hip crease passing below the top of the knee. That's what we're always striving for when we're doing these air squats, on top of maintaining that upright torso. So last squat, she's going to push her hips back, knees track in line with the toes, and look at how far those hips go down. Hip crease below the top of the knee. Thanks, Rebecca. Now, common faults that we'll see, and they usually come from range of motion issues. Knees caving in, and all I would say is drive your knees out, or you can give a tactile cue of holding your hand up, having them press into the hand. Coming up on the toes, it would be sit back into the heels as you go to squat. Just upright. We can get into squat therapy where you have an object in front of you, and it helps you maintain that upright torso as you go to squat. Range of motion, you can add a target to help the person get to reduced range of, or increased range of motion. And the other thing I want to talk about is what's called an immature squat. So an immature squat is where we're meeting those 5 points of performance. However, we won't be able to build off of the squat into the front squat and the overhead squat. So what an immature squat would be is even though I'm keeping my back straight, but as I go down, I end up with this deep hinge. It's going to be really difficult for me to do a front squat because that weight's going to want to pull me forward, or in that overhead squat, I'm not going to be able to keep that position that I need. And what we can do with that is use squat therapy where you have a wall in front of you, you have your hands up, or even you can have a person standing in front of you. That would help make sure you're keeping that torso upright. And then just over time, you work on keeping that chest up and being able to squat with the shoulders over top of the hips. So, you guys have any questions on the air squat? No, I know I went through that, and you guys have heard me give those 5 points performance 100 times at this point. But the big thing is keeping that chest up. Make sure we hit full range of motion. Do you want to grab a PVC pipe real quick? Or a barbell? It's totally up to you. Rebecca, I really appreciate you doing this because I do not have a good front rack. You know, this stuff is, it gets better with practice. So when I first started, I had an immature squat. It was terrible, and then I couldn't overhead squat. But over time, doing squat therapy on the wall and just really focusing on hitting these points of performance, my squat got better over time. And now I feel like I have a pretty good air squat. Next up, we're going to get into the front squat. The points of performance from the air squat also apply to the front squat. However, we're adding an object and we're creating a front rack position. So with the front squat, can you get that front rack? Look at that, nice pretty front rack. What we're looking for here is the midline supports the object. So the bar is in that front rack position, elbows are up to create that front rack, and we have a loose fingertip grip on the bar. Again, we don't need to have a full grip on the bar because the midline is what is supporting the object, not our hands or our wrist. And so the added points of performance for this would be maintaining that front rack position throughout the entire squat. So can you give us a squat? Do you need a bar for this, or would a bar be easier?
Yeah, probably.
If you guys ever go take your level 1, you'll watch these, like the Flow Masters, the level 3, level 4s do it, and they'll do like a nice, easy, loose fingertip grip. So that's much better. Yeah. She got the elbows up, and now what we're looking for is for that tricep to remain parallel to the ground as she goes throughout this entire squat. Very nice. A common fault we'll see, especially if someone struggles with keeping that upright position, is the elbows will drop in the bottom of that squat, pulling them forward. But we give them the cue to keep the elbows up and stand. The other thing we look for in the front squat is that this bar moves over the middle of the foot, which is your center of mass. So as she squats, again, see how that bar maintains over the center of the foot. Again, if the elbows drop, it pulls her forward. She's going to end up on her toes, or if she catches it too far back, she could run the risk of falling backwards. So thanks, Rebecca. You can go ahead and relax. So that's adding on to the front squat. Again, we need to be able to maintain that good front rack position and let our midline support the object, building off of the points of performance from the air squat. The third one we get into, which is the overhead squat. And so you can probably see a pattern. We're going from air squat, front squat, overhead squat. We're getting farther away from the core. So core to extremity. This is going to require more range of motion, more stabilization in the midline. But we get into this overhead position. Wide grip on that bar. There we go. So the wider the grip, the easier it's going to be on your range of motion. With the overhead squat, again, building off of the air squat, we're looking for two things. The bar moves over the middle of the foot as she squat, and she maintains this good overhead position. A good overhead position is armpits are forward, elbows are locked, so elbow pits are facing up, armpit is forward, and then as she squats, she maintains that position. Let's see it, Rebecca. Oh, very nice. And stand. Now you notice, you can go ahead and relax. Thank you. With the overhead squat, if we fall or we vary 2 inches forward or backwards, we're either going to fall backwards or that bar is going to pull us forward. It's going to be much more difficult to move that weight. So it requires a lot more midline stability and much more focus on what we're doing. So, like Torian, we were talking about it beforehand. You know, what was the cue I gave you?
Martini glass.
Yeah, be a martini glass, not an hourglass. So what I mean by that is oftentimes if we're missing range of motion in our shoulders, we'll give ourselves some slack by bending the elbows. Because you can see what it does to my shoulder joint, right? Here to here, now I have more rotation, but this requires muscle now. This is bone structure supporting, this is muscle supporting. So be a martini glass, not that hourglass. And that's just a simple cue to help you lock out those arms. Does anyone have any questions on, I didn't ask about the front squat. Any questions on the front squat? Any questions on the overhead squat?
Question I do.
Yeah.
What are some things, speaking of, you don't want to be an hourglass, you want to be a martini glass.
Mm-hmm.
Shoulder mobility, anything that we can work on in our own free time to help with front grip and overhead squat grip?
Yeah, so Rick, you can put that bar up if you want. I appreciate you helping me out. So that's a good question. We talked about, was it yesterday? We were talking about front rack. Mm-hmm. So with the front rack, in order to create that front rack, you need extension in the wrist, you need flexion in the elbow, and you need rotation in the shoulder. And so when we look at an athlete, not everyone's the same. I can't just give you the same stretch because for you, we found, well, yours is external rotation in the shoulder. Your shoulder doesn't want to rotate to create this shape, and we found it also affects your overhead position. So for you, it was, I gave you that PVC pipe and we did that stretch. And then there's also a couple banded stretches. But what you're trying to do is get rotation here so your arm can, one, get into that front rack position, but two, if I don't have rotation, see how my arm's forward? If I rotate and open the shoulder joint up, now you can see how the arm goes overhead. So that was the example for you. If it's elbow flexion, we're probably looking at some joint distractions. And if you guys watch the recovery video that we did, it's on YouTube, it's on the podcast. And you all were here for the recovery seminar, except for you, Gina. You weren't here for the recovery seminar. But so we would look at joint distractions for the elbow or stretching the tricep. That would be the other one. And then for the wrist, just a simple old wrist or rolling out that forearm to see what's all gunked up, because we do a lot of gripping in CrossFit. So we don't focus on our forearms enough. But that's a good question. The answer is we need to test and retest and see what is the problem that you're having with creating the shape. Okay. So that makes sense though, right?
Yeah, no,
okay.
Sense, yeah.
Does anyone else have any questions? No? Levi, you got any questions? No? You want to show everyone your six-pack? No? All two watchers? Do we have two? We got more now? We got four? We should take a vote. I'm just messing with you. I'm just messing with you, Levi. Does anyone have any questions on the Facebook channel? Any questions there? No? Where's Greg? He can ask me what PNF stands for. He asked me last time. I couldn't remember what it stood for. I still don't remember right now. It doesn't matter. There's no questions on the Facebook? No? All right. Well, if you guys do have any questions, feel free to send them in to us. But we will probably be breaking down either the press series next or going over the What is Technique lecture from the CrossFit Level 1 handbook. So thanks, everyone.